Hi everyone and welcome to Qigong Project. I'm Robert Koons. Today's video is going to be about embryonic breathing. Embryonic breathing is a technique which originated in Daoist internal practice, but also has ramifications in internal alchemy and contemporary Qigong. Of course, embryonic breathing is a breathing practice, thus the name embryonic breathing. But as you can tell, it's not just a simple inhalation and exhalation based breathing practice. It must be in some way related to an embryo or a fetus. We're going to go into that and much more in this video. By the time you're done watching, you will know the difference between embryonic breathing in its original form in medieval Taoism, how it changed in internal alchemy practice, and ultimately what it means today within the scope of modern Qigong practice. So buckle up and get ready because we're going to go on a fun ride. If it's all right, I would prefer to speak in generalities than go into very precise references to all kinds of different historical materials. It makes the flow of the video a little bit easier. So, as I said, we're not really sure where embryonic breathing came from, but it was mentioned early enough in the Daoist energetic practice tradition, by Qigong, for instance. But there are also many mentions in the Daoist canon and various other texts from that period. So, embryonic breathing is meant to copy the breathing style of a fetus. In my opinion, I don't think embryonic breathing is a really perfect translation for this type of breathing practice, because what they're really getting at in those texts that discuss this breathing method is that when a fetus is developing inside of the womb, then its breath follows the mother's body. So rather than breathing through its nose or its mouth, instead, when the mother breathes in, then the fetus also seems to get breath, or at least the fetus respires as a result of the mother's respiration. And the fetus, because it's attached to the mother via the umbilicus, then it's getting these important, let's say, nutritive functions such as nutrition from food, or perhaps it's oxygen. I don't know about that. I'm not that knowledgeable about biomedical physiology. But in any event, right, the idea is that the fetus breathes with the mother together. So this is the basic concept of embryonic breathing, and that's approximately what Qigong meant in the Baopuzi, in the Master of Embracing Simplicity, which is the main text which is associated with him. So from there, then we can infer that this is a kind of practice where essentially we don't use our mouth or our nose to breathe. Now, of course, I just want to point out that is completely impossible to do in reality. You are a sentient being with a biological body, and you need to breathe, and respiration, such as the respiration that you perform through the surface of your skin, is not sufficient to be able to last very long without breathing through your mouth or your nose, preferably your nose, by the way. But having said that, it is possible for the breath to become very slow and very peaceful and very calm, and for the body to become very relaxed, so much so that you might not sense the breath coming and going through your nose and mouth, and then other people around you, even if they put their hand in front of your face, they might not be able to feel the breath coming from your nose, for instance. So that's what embryonic breathing is. It's the sense of not breathing through your nose or breathing through your mouth. Now, if you want to understand this a little bit more deeply, embryonic breathing originally was part of a broader context in Daoist practice, or so-called Daoist practice. I'd like to contest, actually, that these energetic practices are not Daoist in origin. They predate Taoism significantly. But having said that, we normally tip the hat to Taoism because they were the school of thought which emphasized those practices the most. So, anyway, to get that caveat out of the way, embryonic breathing developed within an already existing infrastructure of Taoist breathing practices. If you really want to understand how these practices used to work, they were categorized into a few separate schools. So there were schools like the Daoyin school, which is essentially stretching the body, or at least in the early days, it was essentially stretching the body, later maybe guiding the mind. But in the early days, let's say mostly stretching the body, there was the breathing school, which is sometimes called the Tuna school, right, which can emphasize inhalation or exhalation. So breathing methods which either mainly focus on inhalation method or mainly focus on exhalation method. We'll talk about that in a later video, don't worry. Or the visualization school, right, where you would visualize some things in your body or outside of your body, or something going from the outside to the inside of your body, and various other similar schools, right? And so these different approaches to practice basically constituted the earliest iteration of what today we call Qigong. So embryonic breathing exists within the ecology of breathing practices. And what the early practitioners of this method believed was that essentially, once they were good enough at doing deep breathing, which usually, by the way, was the inhalation-oriented practices like bishi, right, sealing the breath so that you can hold the breath for a very, very long time. And then when you breathe out, right, you breathe in through the nose and you hold it for a very long time. And then when you breathe out, you just do it very subtly through the mouth. Their basic principle was, if you don't lose breath from what's being held in your abdomen, right, because they probably believed that the breath could really be brought into the abdomen rather than just the diaphragm expanding and the muscles expanding, right? They probably thought they really were breathing and bringing the qi, which is the air from outside the body, according to that period of Chinese thought, right, into the body, storing it in the dantian, right, storing it in the abdomen. And then if they could only breathe out just a very little, then they wouldn't lose the qi that they got from outside their bodies, right? So that kind of breathing practice is called bishi, sealing the breath. You breathe in, you essentially hold your breath for a certain period of time, and then you breathe out very subtly through your nose, or through your mouth, sorry. And so embryonic breathing was like the final stage of that practice, or for people who practice Daoyin, right? They do Daoyin and maybe breathing practices as well. So you're sitting on the mat, like on a bamboo mat or whatever, not a yoga mat, but it may as well be, or sitting on a cushion, and you're doing various stretching exercises that are loosening up the body. And then you do deep breathing exercises afterward as a kind of energetic meditation. And then the ultimate outcome of that is, once the body is very loose and open, then it's possible to sit in perfect meditation, and it seems like the breath doesn't come from outside of the body and it doesn't leave the body, right? It just stays in the abdomen. And then the mind can become very stable. So when they say fetus or embryo, right, what they really mean is the mind of a fetus resting in the womb, right, being nurtured. The core idea of Taoism, regardless of whether we talk about the philosophy of Taoism or Qigong practice from Taoism or internal alchemy, is always the feminine embracing the masculine is what allows for the masculine energy to mature and to be able to develop, right? So Taoism is essentially predicated on the idea of a mother figure or a mother energy nurturing the energy of the child. And so whether we talk about internal alchemy or whether we talk about ancient Daoist breathing methods like Tuna and Tai Chi, or whether we talk about some styles of contemporary Qigong, they're always using this same idea of the mother nurturing the child growing inside of her abdomen. But for us, we want to do that with our qi. So in the ancient breathing practices, the idea was, once you had built up sufficient ability to maintain the breath in the abdomen and to be able to hold it there for a long time and not to release too much while still staying relaxed, right? That's a major interdiction in those ancient books. You have to stay relaxed when you do this. Then eventually you could enter into perfect meditation because you wouldn't be focusing on the breath anymore. It wouldn't be distracting you. And so you would develop Tai Chi. Your mind or your spirit would be at rest in your dantian because you don't feel the breath coming and going anymore. So it's much easier to enter into an environment where thoughts and external stimuli don't seem to bother you. So that was the original practice trajectory of Tai Chi. It was an advanced practice that would happen to people after they mastered breathing practices and Dao Yin. Now let's move on to the meaning in internal alchemy. Have you noticed my hair is getting longer and longer? I should probably go for a haircut. The reason why it gets so much longer is because usually, to be honest with you guys, usually my wife cuts my hair for me, and she went to China to learn acupuncture for a couple of months, and so during this time I haven't got a haircut. But you can see I haven't gone completely feral. I did shave. So now you know why my hair is a little bit out of control. I should probably just go to the barber. Anyway, that aside, let's talk about embryonic breathing and internal alchemy. So internal alchemy is not only, let's say, one technique. It kind of is, right? Internal alchemy is always about maintaining the breath and the spirit, or the breath and the mind, merged together so that they enter into deep meditation, or so they enter into the pre-heaven state. By the way, if you really want to understand this stuff, you should go back and watch my video about the meaning of the pre-heaven and post-heaven in Daoist practice. That's a very important topic, and if you understand it well, then everything I'm about to say, and that I did say up till now, will make a lot more sense. Anyway, so internal alchemy tries to use the merging of breath and mind to be able to attain the pre-heaven state and to be able to develop the original energy of the body from that, right? The idea is to borrow some energy from the Tao. But having said that, there can be more than one technique that you use to get there. Some people focus in the lower dantian. Some people focus on the space between the eyes. Some people focus on the eyes first and the lower dantian next. Some people focus on the upper back, right? There's tons of different ways to start your practice. But after you've achieved that, and after the qi has developed enough in the pre-heaven and post-heaven states, then eventually your breath will become more subtle. And when it becomes more subtle, it will slow down and become very, very calm. And then eventually, once you get to a certain level of practice, it will seem like the breath has stopped completely. And then at that time, it's much easier to sit in meditation in a completely unimpeded, natural, open, and very, very wonderful and peaceful state. So when the breath seems to have completely stopped, again, you don't feel it coming and going through your nose, then that's said to be embryonic breathing. And usually it's the sign that you are moving toward an advanced level of practice. So in the beginning of practice of Neiden, you can usually generate qi after a few months. The qi can usually move up the back of the body and down the front of the body within within a year or so, or maybe two. And typically you can get even to the stage where that stops. All of the qi collects in the middle of the body, and then it starts to rise up the central meridian of the body. But getting to the level of consistent embryonic breathing where the qi stops completely, or where the breath stops completely, and then also it seems like the movement of qi stops too, right? Everything is just resting in the abdomen behind the belly button, is usually a sign that soon enough, then the sky gate, the fontanelle on top of the head, will open, and it will be possible for the spiritual energy to start to leave the top of the head. So you have to have attained embryonic breathing typically before that can happen if you want to do the practice right. Now the question is why? Why is it that you need to do embryonic breathing? Why can't you just focus on the top of your head, or maybe you can hit it with a hammer or something? The reason is because we're trying to cultivate what's called true yang, or pure yang energy, right? Chun yang. So this kind of pure yang energy is not the same as the qi of the body, right? The qi of the body is mixed up a lot with blood and with various other things within the body, right? In the meridian system of the body. And so to be able to generate pure yang, which is essentially clarity of spirit that manifests as a moving energy, this requires that we continuously revert back to stillness and back to the pre-heaven state, and we become very, very tranquil and peaceful. So we build more and more and more energy, and it becomes more and more pure and stronger and stronger. And then eventually, from that profound stillness, the more still you are, the stronger the energy can move over time. So that's the reason why people in internal alchemy like to focus on embryonic breathing. And in older Taoist practice, embryonic breathing is a result of performing certain kind of breathing practices. In internal alchemy, it's a natural byproduct of the practice, which happens at a certain time. And in my experience, it can happen at different levels. So you can start to experience this sense of the breath not coming and going through the nose, I don't think too early in practice, but not too late in practice either. But it doesn't mean the practice is mature yet. So you may experience a few times that you go through periods where the breath seems to stop for a while, and then it comes back, and it seems to stop for a while, and it comes back. But the general trajectory over time is that sense of the breath stopping lasts for longer and longer. And so then you enter into the environment of embryonic breathing more and more until this larger spiritual transformation takes place. And then the more salient aspect of practice is the relationship of the spirit to the empty space outside of the body. So that's broadly how the trajectory of that practice works, which means that when did you really attain embryonic breathing? It's not so clear. Maybe you attained it at the end of the small heavenly orbit. Maybe you attained it at the end of the large heavenly orbit. Maybe you attained it closer to the time that you're starting to really transform the spirit into emptiness. Maybe you attain it at different levels, right? It becomes deeper and deeper over time. That's the nature of Neidan practice. It's not about getting the thing completely all at once, but instead over time it becomes more and more refined, more and more subtle, and it has a greater and greater effect. So that's one thing. But then another thing is, Taoism is not a monolithic tradition. There's more than one way of seeing things. And as you know, for instance, we talked about these early practices, which really are different from Neidan, right? Early Taoist practices are different from Neidan or internal alchemy. Completely different idea, because they're focused on bringing the qi into the body from outside, holding it there, loosening up the body through Daoyin. Internal alchemy is really pure meditation, basically. And the use of the mind is subtle, right? So there's so much to it anyway. There's too much. But as you can see, there's difference in ideas. Even in internal alchemy, there's also a difference in ideas. You know, I remember one time this a Wudang disciple swore at me and called me all kinds of bad names because I said embryonic breathing can happen early in practice, because really it just means, in some instances, settling the mind in the lower abdomen together with the breath and then entering into the pre-heaven state. And this person swore up and down that, I was only reading these modern sources, which are, BS and so on and so forth. But I have to say, actually, that the temple that person goes to, the main internal alchemy text that they use is called Da Cheng Jie Yao, which basically means like great achievement, expedited route. And in Da Cheng Jie Yao, it actually says that embryonic breathing means that the spirit or the mind rests underneath the umbilicus, and then the breath or the qi hibernates underneath the umbilicus. And that's called Tai Xi. That's called embryonic breathing. So they actually treat it as part of the first stage of practice, called the 100 days, let's say 100-day foundational stage of practice. And so you might ask, why is it that some people think that embryonic breathing happens only when you're really at an advanced level, and then some people say it starts at the start? I would argue that by looking broadly at Taoist literature, you can say that embryonic breathing isn't a one-stop and you're done thing. It's a trajectory that happens over the entire time that you practice. You need to start cultivating it at the start, because what it really means is that the breath and the mind become very peaceful and mixed together in the lower abdomen. And then over time, it seems like they stop and you enter into the pre-heaven state, or you enter into the state of genuine tranquility and deep meditation. So that starts when you start practicing by focusing your mind under your umbilicus and meditating on the breath. And it becomes mature when the breath and the qi and the mind all rest together in the dantian, which is full of qi, And it might not be entirely under the umbilicus. Could be behind the umbilicus. It could be that the upper and lower abdomen seem to be merged together as one, and the whole space is full of qi, and it seems to have an undefined size, right? That's kind of when the embryonic breathing practice starts to become more mature. And eventually it enters into its most mature space, or most mature time, when there's no real sense of inner or outer, there's no sense of size, there's no sense of smallness, there's no sense of time, there's no sense of self, and you can stay like that in profound stillness for a very, very long time. Then you know that that practice is starting to really become mature. So rather than thinking of it as something that you have to do when you reach a certain level of practice, like in the really old days in Taoism, where they would mix Dao Yin and sealing the breath and these things, right? In the internal alchemy school, it's more like a trajectory that happens over time. And that's really the beauty of practice, is that it takes a while to develop, but as it does, you keep getting benefit from it, and the benefit becomes greater and greater. So that's approximately the meaning of Tai Chi, or embryonic breathing, in internal alchemy. But let's talk a little bit about its implications in contemporary Qigong practice. Okay, embryonic breathing in Qigong practice. So you might have seen many years ago, a very famous Qigong teacher from Taiwan named Yang Jingming, or Yang Jingming. He authored a book about embryonic breathing, and you might have read it, or maybe you haven't. Maybe it's worth reading. Anyway, embryonic breathing can be considered to be part of the legacy of Qigong, or part of the heritage of Qigong. I think really technically it's from these older schools of thought, and it developed most inside of internal alchemy. But having said that, it's certainly something that you could aspire to in Qigong practice, especially if you also practice seated meditation. But let me tell you what I think. Most of the time, seated meditation and Qigong are kind of two different things. Seated meditation and Qigong are mutually supportive, but Qigong is usually about activating the body and mind in some way. And meditation is usually about getting out of the way of the body and mind by entering into tranquility. So in Qigong practice, if you really want to master embryonic breathing, then you should learn meditation. But if you want to bring the basic concept of embryonic breathing into your Qigong practice, then probably the best thing to do is to learn to really deeply calm your breath when you practice. So you breathe through your nose, and you make the movement of the air very smooth and very gradual and very slow and totally silent, and enter into a state of profound relaxation and profound inner tranquility. And I'm not sure 100% that you can really attain the highest level of embryonic breathing in that kind of practice, because there's always some mental intention. So it's hard to become completely still, which is the prerequisite for meditation. But having said that, you can become relatively very tranquil and relatively very still, and you can get a lot of breathing from the concept of embryonic breathing, right? Not coming, not going, not leaving, not entering, right? Always just peacefully maintaining a state of internal oneness. And I think that will give you benefit even in your moving Qigong practice. However, I don't necessarily recommend that you try to do this while you practice martial arts, because in martial arts you need to breathe relative to the strength and speed of your movements. And so usually in martial arts, the tuna paradigm, the grasping and spitting paradigm, is used more often. But that may be a topic for another video. So broadly, that's my understanding and my views of embryonic breathing from the perspective of ancient Taoist practice, from the perspective of internal alchemy, and from the perspective of modern Qigong. I just wanted to mention also that I'm planning very soon on releasing a short pre-recorded class about embryonic breathing. And so I will share the link for that when that's ready, both on YouTube and on my Substack. It should be ready by early September. And so I'll put the link for that up. It's going to be quite affordable. It's going to be a total of 2 lectures with also my own translation of the Embryonic Breathing Classic, which is a Tang Dynasty era document that was attributed to Gohong, but written posthumously, actually. And so I will be presenting all of the details from that document, teaching you how to start your practice and teaching you how to understand the practice also at a more advanced level, so that when you have meditated for long enough, then you'll understand when you're starting to get toward that level of really completing the embryonic breathing practice. So thank you very much for watching. I always genuinely appreciate our interactions here, so please make sure to comment in the comments section. I love to hear from you. I love to hear your experience, and I love to hear your questions. Somebody very thoughtfully mentioned to me that they hope that we'll always be able to have this kind of good discourse where we can openly and freely talk to each other about these interesting topics in Qigong and meditation and possibly the internal martial arts and Chinese medicine. I'm more than happy to facilitate that as much as possible. So yeah, make sure to, leave a comment, like and subscribe, and I will look forward to seeing you again in the next video. Okay? Enjoy your practice.